Hello everybody, welcome back. So today I'm going to do another tutorial, and this one's going to be an ombre tutorial. So I'm going to show you kind of like a nude into a colour and then like a two colour ombre tutorial as well. So I'm starting off with a nude into a colour. So this colour is Blue Hue. It's one of my most popular coloured acrylics ever, as you can see. That's a cute little nifty trick as well. If ever you are running low, prop it up onto the lid of the pot and it honestly works a treat. So anyway, if I'm doing a nude into a colour, I always start with the colour, just because the nude core powders are just easier to blend over the top. So I always start with the colour. Generally this is always at the tip of the nail, so I always place it right at the end and drag it backwards. Any coloured acrylics you need to use reasonably wet to be able to get the pigment nice and clean without any patches or anything like that. But it is quite common to get patches in your coloured acrylic. All you need to do is then just go over with another bit of thin colour. Make sure you're only using small beads, using it really nice and wet, and you should have no problems. So once I've laid that colour and faded it back nice and smooth into a nice fade that I'm happy with, I then take a small-ish, wet-ish bead of my core powder that I'm using. In this case it's Birthday Suit, just because I think it's the easiest to blend and always looks the best on ombres. So I take a smallish, wet-ish bead and use this one as my kind of blending bead. That's why it needs to be a little bit wetter, so I've got some more movement to it. And then what I do is I go in and get a larger, drier bead to do my back cuticle bead. And it being drier means that it's slightly more opaque as well, so you can see the colour a bit better, as you can see there. So I push this right back to where the cuticle needs to be and do exactly the same, just using really light strokes, dragging that forward. Just so it kind of emphasises that blend and makes it all run nice and smooth. Make sure I'm tidying up those sides and the end as I go along. And that is the finished look of the Blue Hue and the Birthday Suit ombre. Now I'm going to go into another nude into a coloured acrylic, just to show you another example really. This one's going to be slightly more sped up. And this one is using exactly the same technique. So I'm using a more neon colour this time. It's not as popular as Blue Hue, purely because I think we're not quite into that kind of neon summer time of year yet, which is really depressing. So I'm using exactly the same technique, using a small-ish, quite wet bead of the colour, dragging it back after placing it right at the tip. When doing this, make sure you're using really just light strokes, just using the very tip of your brush. If you use the whole brush, you're going to get kind of streak marks in there, and you just don't want that. You can see then I did go in and pat the colour as well with quite a wet brush. This for me personally, I think just gets the monomer right in there, make sure that there is no patches or anything like that. So I'll do that sometimes if I think it's not quite looking as clean and fresh as I'd like. And then again, once I've got that nice and settled, I take my small-ish, wet-ish bead of the core powder, placing that just in front of where I would put the cuticle bead, just dragging that. I tend to place it, pat it to the side so I know it's nice and covered, and then I go in and start dragging it over the colour, making sure I'm working kind of from side to side all the time, so that I know all the sides are covered and it's nice and even. And then once I've done that one, again going in with a slightly larger, drier bead, and placing that back at the cuticle. So to get a drier bead, as you can see what I just did, I picked up my bead and then drained it onto my paper towel that I'm using. And that helps just get rid of some of that excess monomer that you don't want. And that's what makes it a little bit drier, which is a really good technique to know. So say you've picked up a bead and you're a bit like, oh, I didn't mean for it to be that wet. Just drain it onto your towel that you're using, and it will just get rid of that excess that you don't want. Now I'm going to go into a two coloured ombre tutorial, and I'm going to use two nice neons ready for summer because I need something to brighten up my life. So I'm using Banana and Caribbean Green. I love this green. I think it's literally amazing. I cannot wait to use it loads over summer. It's just the perfect neon highlighter green, I think. So anyway, when I'm doing two colour ombre tutorials, you need to remember to constantly use them both really thin, really wet, because they're colours. And like I mentioned before, they don't work the same as kohl. So kohl powders, you can use them much thicker, much drier. These ones you can't. They need to be thin so that you can kind of use them in more like a painting method rather than like a patting pressing as you usually do with acrylic. So I've laid my green, and whilst it's still wet from the monomer, I'm going in with my back bead of yellow. As you can see on this one, I actually went straight in and went straight back to the cuticle with this one, purely because they're thinner and they're wetter, they will cover more area. And because they're wetter, it makes that blend slightly easier. And I'm just running those on top of the other. As in this one, I can see a little bit of a patch at that back where the yellow is. So I'm just going again with another little bit. You can kind of go over it as much as you want to, as because it's thin and because you're not using very much, the nail isn't getting particularly thick. So I'm just going in with a little bit more until I'm happy with it really, and stroking it all the way down until I'm happy with that blend. And I'm just going to do another one of those using two slightly different colours. Again, neon, because we live for neon. These are, I've forgotten what that colour's called, but not to worry. The orange is Mango Tango though. And so I'm doing exactly the same. By picking the one I want on the tip, I always take the one that I think is going to be either slightly darker or slightly more pigmented. So just because the lighter colours are easier to blend over the top. It's easier to blend a lighter colour than a darker colour. So for example, say I was doing like a black and a nude, I'd always go in first with my black, because the nude is so much easier to get a nice blend on, rather than trying to blend that black. You'd be there for years. And I always kind of do it like one colour, then the other. Once I finish with that first colour, so once I finish with this pinker colour here, I won't dip back into that pink colour, purely because then I feel like it just starts to get a bit grainy and a little bit streaky. So I always just do one, then the other, done. So I've done my first bead as normal. As you can see, I'm literally following the same routine with every single one. So I start at the tip, then do the back, start with the darker colour, then do the back, or start with the more pigmented one. Either way, I always either go in with the lighter colour afterwards or the kohl powder, as like I mentioned, they are easier to blend. So I do really like this ombre. It's a bit annoying because you can't really see the difference between the two colours that well, but it's fine. But anyway, that rounds up today's video. I really hope you like it, and I'll see you next time.